Peace on Earth, Ethan Indigo Smith here. There are numerous types of philosophies for numerous types of situations. A philosophy, it's important to think about what a philosophy is. Um, I think of philosophy as a refined perspective onto a situation in reality, whether it's an internal or an external situation or reality in total. So, quality philosophies offer quality windows that one can get a comprehensive view of the situation in reality that that philosophy pertains to. One can extract refined political philosophy from Orwell's 1984, even though it is a fictional work, of course. Within 1984, you have the theory and practice to oligarchical collectivism, which is a fictional book within the book, of course. But that idea that he put forth, extracted from the fictional work and iterated in the book within the book of the fictional work, is, I think, of course, I think this is the ultimate political philosophy at this point in time. There have been other political philosophies, of course, and they evolve one upon the other. A lot of philosophies start off with quality observations and end up with poor deductions, and even worse, poor uh, projections of the future. A great philosopher that is so hard to read because he's German and because of the language that he used is Hegel. I've made videos about this before, but just real quick, Hegel had his philosophy on world mentality of the individual and world um, government styles of institutions. He based that on the master slave dialectic. This philosophy influenced Karl Marx. Karl Marx, of course, influenced modern times. The master slave dialectic proposes that all throughout history there has been a conflict between the weaker and stronger forces. Many different types of philosophies have been extracted from this idea. Essentially, um, the master will enslave the weaker. The stronger will enslave the weaker until the slave fights back. And only then will one of them either be killed or will they recognize the other as being fully conscious beings worthy of respect. So Hegel puts forth that storyline of history where the master slave dynamic takes place, using all sorts of allegorical, historical, biblical examples, as well as concrete historical examples. Marx designed his whole philosophy off of that. Many of his observations were separate. His economical observations were separate from this. But the idea that there is a master slave situation in the factory is essentially what Karl Marx proposed. that there will be an inevitable revolt of the slaves in the factory of the master bourgeois owners. And the this 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 is a decent observation, but his prediction was that this would be an inevitable conflict, and that this would lead to socialism, and that socialism would lead to communism. None of this has unfolded. His predictions were certainly not quality. Economists appreciate his observations, but his predictions are inarguably not quality. But what actually happened in Russia was not what he predicted. The revolution of the slaves, despite all the hands that were in that mess, took place from the feudal system that the fields and agricultural terms were operating under. The slaves of the fields revolted against the masters in the government in Russia in 1917, not the factory workers. And if we step back now to Orwell's 1984 and the theory and practice to oligarchical collectivism, excuse me, one can extract from that what I did in my book, The Complete Patriot's Guide to Oligarchical Collectivism, that history is actually a lot like Hegel said, and um, almost Marx was very close, almost like Marx predicted, but history has been and likely will continue to be a engagement and battle between institutions and institutionalization on one side, and individuals and individuation on the other. And if we look at the world today, that is what's behind the new Cold War that is the East and West conflict overtly playing out in Ukraine and subtly playing out all over. On one side, you have collectivism, and on the other side, you have the pursuit of liberty. And it has always been that simple. In order to progress liberty, certain collectives are required, but it's the focus, right? Same thing with collectives require individuals. It's the major and minor energies that are exhibited. So really what's taking place is a battle between the individuation, where liberty, to the point where the most rejected and weird and perverse, accused of being perverse, slash, you know, are given all the individual rights that we all deserve. Whereas in collectivism, the collective has the rights. The individual is absolutely tertiary to the collective. And that leads us to an internal dynamic that I wanted to touch on. Individual ownership is what has been promoted in the West and what has been eliminated virtually in the East up until recently. They've had some shifts with that, of course. But their mentality, of course, is now shift, because do they respect the property rights of their neighbor? Does Russia respect the property rights of their neighbor Ukraine? Uh, so what is required to take place in the West right now is to diminish the oligarchical collectivism that is ruling and pressuring individuals in these Western nations. All Western nations right now are undergoing tremendous stress with finding adequate housing for their people, in part because the systems are enabling oligarchical collectivists to engage in uh, price gouging, price fixing, and along with their purchasing multiple properties with all sorts of different angles to work out their taxes that for them is wonderful, but ultimately puts a lot of pressure on people that are looking for a roof over their heads. Now, when it comes down to it, all governments do internally is promote and prohibit. They have been promoting oligarchical collectivism in the real estate market to the point now that the potential ownership is now out of grasp, out of reach for your average individual. This this puts strain on the economy in multiple different ways. If they wanted to do something about this, they could. It'd be real easy. We could diminish property rights for residents, for primary residents, and we could also increase taxation on people that own more than X number of residences. And we could prevent corporations from owning residential property. And there's numerous ways to do this. Those are just a simple kind of binary of how we could promote and or promote individual ownership and prohibit corporate ownership of residential property. So people are losing faith in the uh, West, so to speak, and looking towards the East, so to speak, and looking towards this idea of communism where they at least get a roof over their head. And who can blame them? I mean, but we should understand that communism is the left wing version of nationalism, right? So look into that more through Mark Passio's videos and just in general history engagement of the fact that communism has never existed. There's only been regimes that have used the idea of communism to enforce their own oligarchical collectivism. So, the theory and practice to oligarchical collectivism, the idea of understanding governments in terms of how oligarchical collectivist they are, is, I think, the pinnacle uh, ism understanding, the pinnacle philosophical understanding of the situation that is politics, is the perfect window the theory and practice to oligarchical collectivism. But first, you need to be impartial. The theory and practice to oligarchical collectivism, understanding that the world is a world history and the world at present is a dynamic interplay of institutions and individuals. That's all history is. You can't have a proper perspective on all that if you are partisan. You have to be impartial. You have to check yourself every so often when you're using that philosophical window. Am I being impartial? How can I be impartial here? So it requires impartiality and not associating oneself with a party. So I hope that you'll check out my book, The Complete Patriot's Guide to Oligarchical Collectivism. I hope that you'll use the window of institutions contrasted with individuals and institutionalization contrasted with individuation as a, a way to hear and comprehend the political situation. So, peace. Thanks for checking out.